Investigations and Oversight will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess in the subcommittee at any time. I'd like to now recognize myself for 5 minutes for opening remarks. And first of all, I'd like to thank you all, my guests, for coming here today on my first chair. It's exciting to have here some delightful experts in our oversight, and it's also an honor to have my ranking member, Sykes, here with me today. I want to lay out our objectives and how we're going to run our committees from here on out in reference to former Chair Gallagher in a subcommittee I was a part of. We'll start on time, we'll stay on time, and we'll not use acronyms to the best of our abilities because most people don't understand acronyms, even the people that use them I found in the military. I even practiced this too, so this is great. All right. Our country's in a unique position to collect talent from all over the world. I think this is one of our greatest strengths for the last several decades. It's made us this amazing hodgepodge of talent, and it's really accelerated our country in technologies and our ability to lead the rest of the world, to collect ideas from all over the world, and to accelerate that process through our educational system. It has also made us a target. When you look at the people who are immigrating here to do education, we have about 1 million students here every year. A large portion of them are from countries that are our peers and our rivals, and that take that technology back to their countries, and we have to be careful of that or we'll lose our position. In case you haven't been keeping up with our educational system, it's ranked, I think, 40th in the world right now. It's not a good position to be, even when you're in the lead. You can't just steal talent and stay in front of everybody else. And when you're giving your information to other countries willingly, and I think there's something to be gained from collaboration. I think that's a good thing. But you have to be careful. You have to be smart if you're running a business or a country. I think when we have the unique and changing ways, especially in advanced technologies, AI, quantum, and everything else that we're teaching our children in schools now, we have to be very, very quick to put guardrails on that to make sure that we stay in the leading edge of technologies and that we continue to be competitive and actually lead the rest of the world. One of the things I realized that the CCP has done is they refer to our fruits as their honey. They literally say they're coming up and suckling at that nectar, if you will, absorbing that pretty much at cost. They don't have to invest in it. They just get to take it back to their country and benefit from it. That doesn't necessarily benefit the United States, though. When you have foreign companies and professors and other people coming here to pick the flowers in foreign lands to make honey in China, that doesn't bode well for us. And we need to make sure that this is not only a quote, but realize that this is the mantra of the CCP right now. I think we need to continue to slow the leaks, make sure we protect our technologies, and provide opportunities for our homegrown students who will remain in America and be the future of our technologies when we talk about developing our oversight for these technologies. Starting with what is firmly within our control, we should review federal regulations that are seen both as too burdensome and also those that are too lenient. Work with researchers and research institutions to implement new methods to ensure accountability is enhanced and improved as we go forward. And we also need to ensure that grant awards have contractual mechanisms to certify that background checks on staff are done. And one thing that maybe you don't realize, when I was an associate professor at Georgia Tech in Morehouse, we had foreign instructors, we had foreign students. Matter of fact, a large portion of them. There's a financial advantage to that. But I was also used as an investigator or to help investigate from the FBI a foreign national instructor who was then arrested because they were stealing secrets. This is a real thing, and that was a couple decades ago. It hasn't gotten better, it's gotten worse, and we need to be careful. Our nation's premier research institutions have been an all-you-can-eat buffet for other countries right now, and especially our adversaries. We cannot let this metaphorical buffet continue, or we risk ceding our dominance in innovation and scientific research. I look forward to the witnesses' testimony today, informing our committee on the steps we can take to reverse these current vulnerabilities and enlighten us on what we can do better. With that, I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you, Chair McCormick, and congratulations on your chairmanship of this subcommittee. Your practice rounds served you well. I also look forward to working with you and the entire subcommittee for ensuring that we have robust and productive meetings in order to help serve the science community for our country. Before I start my remarks, I do want to take the time to express my condolences for the loss of one of the members of our full committee, Sylvester Turner, who passed away last night. He represented the state of Texas and was formerly the mayor of Houston. And my husband and I have known him for some time, and I can't even begin to express the sadness that we feel, not only for the city of Houston, for his family, but for this country who has lost a great man, a great patriot, and a great American. So if you have a moment to send up a prayer or thoughts of words of comfort for him and his family and his community, on behalf of the Democrats in this committee, and hopefully I speak for the full committee in expressing my condolences. For years, this committee has led the way in promoting sensible and responsible research security policy. America did not become the world leader in science because we cowered from our adversaries. We became the world leader because we created a welcoming research environment that set the standard of how global science is conducted. And while we are proud of these values, we are also aware that adversarial governments, including the People's Republic of China, often take advantage of our system and exploit its openness. But our response should not be to let our opponents fundamentally change our American scientific culture and in turn make it difficult for our researchers to address our most pressing national challenges. As a proud representative of Ohio's 13th Congressional District in Northeast Ohio, I know what's at stake. Ohio's 13th is home to a tech hub that received $51 million in CHIPS and science investment to leverage Akron's national leadership in polymer science and sustainable polymers. From sustainable tires to cutting-edge polymers, the next generation of rubber and plastic products will happen in my district. This opportunity was not, however, created in a vacuum. It was made possible by fundamental researchers around the world working together on chemistry and engineering. Researchers at the University of Akron worked on these fundamental chemistry problems within a global science community, and we have benefited from international partnerships, and we welcome the best minds from around the world to allow our nation and our expertise to grow. Of course, we recognize that there are valid research security concerns, and this committee has worked in a bipartisan way to address these issues, including through the landmarks CHIPS and Science Act that was passed in a bipartisan way, and we will continue to fight to maintain the CHIPS and the Science Act. I know we heard some contrary conversation yesterday at the address from the president. Among its many actions, CHIPS and Science authorized the National Science Foundation to maintain a research security office that works closely with law enforcement intelligence communities to address many of these concerns from a federal agency perspective. This office, in conjunction with efforts from other SST agencies and the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, has created research security training modules, created frameworks to assess grant proposals for national security risks, and issued common sense disclosure forms for use across grant-making agencies. Since the committee began looking at this issue in 2018, universities have also stepped up to the plate examining their own research enterprise and identifying ways to make it more secure. MIT, for example, compiled a report in 2022 that investigates how our premier research institutions can promote research security while preserving open scientific research, open intellectual exchange, and the free flow of ideas and people. I look forward to hearing about Dr. Zuber's experience co-chairing the National Academies Roundtable, where academies, industry, law enforcement, and the intelligence community worked to come to a common understanding of research security threats and best practices. It is my hope that this committee continues to be a productive place to hold these very important conversations, particularly as we are witnessing attacks to the very core of our federal research enterprise. Just as we must be clear-eyed about the threat posed by foreign adversaries, I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle don't shy away from speaking out when their own government weakens the United States standing on the international stage. If we do not maintain American leadership in science and technology, we will lose what is worth protecting in the first place. And if we don't lead, someone else will follow. I would prefer the United States leads. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the committee members, to the staff for what I know will be a productive Congress. Thank you to our witnesses for being here. And Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Sykes. It was a pleasure. And with that, I recognize Chair Babin, and thank you for joining us today, this morning, sir, for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate it. And the first thing I want to say is, excuse me, man, I'm sorry. I want to thank Ranking Member Sykes for that news. Very sad. I want to express my condolences at the loss of former mayor and our fellow member of this committee of Sylvester Turner. I'm absolutely shocked. I knew he'd been having some health problems, but I did not know that we were going to lose him at this early date like this. Just want to say how sorry I am about it. I've worked with him for several years now, and really appreciated his service as mayor of Houston. He was a go-to guy, and he was nice. He was always a gentleman. I just want to say how much I appreciated his service. I'm sorry for his family, and just shocked that we've lost him. Anyway, thank you for telling us about that. I want to thank our witnesses as well for being here and joining us to discuss a very serious, relevant topic, the security threats to our federal research enterprise. America's leadership in science and technology was built on the foundation of federal investment in basic research. These investments have enhanced our national security, strengthened our economy, and improved the lives of our citizens. Our unique research ecosystem, which combines federal, academic, and private R&D efforts, drives America's advancement in science and technology. However, for this system to work, we need a degree of open science that facilitates collaboration and transparency. The challenge is ensuring this openness does not compromise our research security. Although the United States has greatly profited from international scientific collaboration and the contributions of foreign-born scientists, other countries, both friend and foe, are also benefiting from U.S. investments. And while our goal is to ensure that all federally funded scientists adhere to the U.S. principles of scientific fairness and integrity, regardless of race or citizenship status, it is important to recognize that not all nations share these values. As this committee is well aware, the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, is determined to surpass the U.S. as the global leader in science and technology by 2050, and by any means necessary, including espionage, theft, or forced acquisition. And I think history has borne that out, that they're willing to do whatever it takes. The theft of our basic research poses a significant risk to our global competitiveness, handing our cutting-edge innovations to adversaries and undermining both our economy and our ability to lead in discovery. This is no idle threat, and it creates a serious strategic challenge. The CCP has been explicit about its efforts to steal our research results to further its technological progress. A 2023 survey by the Center for Strategic International Studies found 224 reported instances of Chinese espionage directed at the United States, and more than 1,200 lawsuits were filed by U.S. companies against Chinese entities for intellectual property theft since 2000. In fact, even the Chinese consulate was closed in Houston, Texas, where my district is, from Houston over to Louisiana. It was closed back during the first Trump administration for some of these very reasons. For the instances of espionage where the actor and intent were known, 49% of incidents directly involved Chinese military or government employees. 46% involved cyber espionage. 29% sought to acquire military technology, and 54% targeted commercial technologies. This committee has passed multiple bills to protect American research. Some of this legislation directed the Office of Science and Technology Policy 2, coordinate efforts and standardize requirements across all federal science agencies to provide a strong framework for research security. However, previous administration failed to execute this framework within the directed timeline, missing deadlines by over a year in some cases, and provided little to no coordination and no community engagement. The government needs clear and uniform guidance for our agencies and researchers, and I'm confident that this second Trump administration will continue the good work of its previous term and reopen communication channels. Effective communication between law enforcement agencies and universities is paramount to securing our research enterprise. Universities need to know when researchers are targeted by nefarious actors, and law enforcement should be aware of the participants and conflicts of interest within our academic research ecosystem. This collaboration should also extend to our technology transfer systems. Startups are an important part of our S&T enterprise and present a vulnerability that our global competitors are exploiting. While universities can track licenses derived from on-campus research, they lack transparency about the startup's investors. For instance, a foreign entity could access sensitive research through early investment in a startup before the technology license is even granted, thereby avoiding a review by the Federal Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or CFIUS. Clearly, this is a complex task that requires thoughtful consideration, but I believe that we are up to this challenge. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today and how we can assess and monitor these threats to our scientific research enterprise. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And right now, I'd like to recognize Representative Lofgren for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman McCormick and Ranking Member Sykes. I really do hope that research security will remain a bipartisan and productive topic for this committee. We have an impressive legacy of legislation and oversight on research security for years. On both sides of the aisle, we have maintained a deep understanding of and respect for, which the chairman has just mentioned, the spirit of openness that animates fundamental research. Republicans and Democrats alike have taken threats to research security seriously, while understanding that in order to be the world leader in science and discovery, we must welcome international collaboration while guarding against espionage. 1 year ago, we sat in this hearing room and discussed the progress that had been made on research security. Honestly, it's difficult to have that same conversation today without acknowledging how different our scientific enterprise looks. The past 6 weeks have seen a widespread attack on federal science. Science agencies froze their awards at the order of President Trump and Elon Musk, and recipients of these prestigious grants were worried not only about continuing their work, but honestly about paying their bills. They now only have certainty for as long as the temporary restraining orders last. Scientists across the federal government were fired in sweeping terminations of probationary employees. And it's worth noting that, probationary employees are people who received a merit-based promotion and were in a probationary status for the promotion. So we have singled out the most meritorious scientists for termination. And the administration is demanding that more be fired. This will impede agencies' ability to disperse congressionally authorized grant money, among other crucial functions. The rug has really been pulled out from under our federal scientific enterprise, which had been the envy of the world. Now, it will be naive to think that this won't affect our ability to attract and retain talent, both American and foreign-born. This committee has a lot to be proud of when it comes to common sense research legislation. CHIPS and Science bolstered our research security resources, our agency's resources. It catalyzed cross-governmental harmonization of research security policies. More needs to be done. Unfortunately, even the progress that has been made will be undercut due to recent decisions. CHIPS and Science established a research security office within NSF. This office was seriously impacted by the probationary firings and the resignations amidst the hostile environment Elon Musk and Doge has created. Chips and Science also mandated that NSF run the Secure Center to support and empower research institutions to mitigate foreign interference. That center lacks a permanent director, and NSF can't hire one while the hiring freeze is in place. Now, while probationary employees are being hired back this week because of the court decisions, there's no guarantee that the agency will get through the coming firings without again compromising the Research Security Office. NSF is a pretty efficient agency. Only about 5% of its budget is spent on agency operations and awards management. By firing NSF employees and coercing others to resign, this administration harms our ability to distribute grant money to meritorious, cutting-edge research, and it's kneecapping our research security capabilities. We might consider the title of this hearing. The most pressing threat to U.S.-funded research is coming from inside the House. For years now, when we sat for these hearings, Democrats and Republicans celebrated the fact that the United States was the chosen home of world-class talent. We took pride in the fact that nearly 80% of foreign-born STEM PhD recipients chose to remain in the United States. If the destabilization of our research ecosystem continues, we will tarnish our reputation and we will invite brain drain. I firmly support the bipartisan work that the Science Committee has done to bolster research security. I hope we can all stand up for that work and insist that existing laws are enforced. And where there are remaining vulnerabilities, I hope we can work together the way we have for years to find common sense solutions that respect the openness of science first articulated at the presidential level by Ronald Reagan in 1985. I fear that unless Republicans and Democrats alike stand against the destruction of our scientific enterprise, we will cede our leadership to China in ways that no research security policies can prevent. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Lofgren. I appreciate your remarks today. With that, Mr. John Sargent, who is not new to the halls of Congress, has only recently retired from Congressional Research Service, where he provided members of Congress and their staffs with research briefings and expert insight on the litany of science and technology issues and policies. In addition to being long-term expert on our niche issues here in SST, Mr. Sargent earned a degree in systems engineering from University of Virginia. With that, I yield for your comments.
Thank you. Chairman McCormick, Ranking Member Sykes, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on this issue, which is of vital importance to U.S. national and economic security. Let's get right down to it. China is not our friend. I wish they were, but they're not. China is an ascendant economic and military power that seeks global tech leadership in emerging, enabling, and critical technologies. China has also become an aspiring hegemonistic power. China first seeks regional domination in East Asia, and from there, world dominance, economically and militarily. The path to their aspirations depends on technological preeminence. To realize this future, China is doing three things in particular. They are building a world-class military and drawing up battle plans against the United States, Taiwan, and their regional neighbors. They have adopted a comprehensive whole-of-nation strategy to acquire foreign technology and are making massive investments to develop new technologies indigenously. And they have adopted a civil-military fusion strategy to deploy this technology in both their commercial industries and their military-industrial base. More than ever, the future of national economic and military power will be built on technological leadership. Speaking broadly, we have it and they don't. That makes American companies, laboratories, and universities China's primary targets for the acquisition of leading-edge technology. And China uses a wide range of tools to get it, illegal and legal. Among them, espionage, theft of U.S. intellectual property, forced technology transfers from U.S. companies, talent recruitment programs, and sending students to study STEM in the United States, some acting as spies. The Soviets sought military superiority, the Japanese economic superiority. China seeks both. China is not only a potential military adversary like the Soviet Union during the Cold War, It's an economic juggernaut, second in GDP only to the United States and larger than Japan, Germany, and the United Kingdom combined. And unlike our relationship with the Soviets, we are actively engaged in trade with China, further complicating the relationship and our ability to limit their access to U.S. technology. We have a myriad of academic relationships with China as well, many on the cutting edge of research and development. And we are educating hundreds of thousands of the best and brightest minds from China at American universities, many in our top graduate science and engineering programs. Much has been done over the past 8 years to better protect U.S. universities and their research from nefarious actors. And yet, here we are again, still trying to tamp down the seemingly ceaseless efforts of China and other adversaries to acquire U.S. scientific knowledge. Too often, government efforts have met resistance from the academic community, which in large measure would prefer to go about its business with no restrictions. I believe this attitude is detrimental to U.S. national security. It should be a core patriotic duty of every U.S. university to support, protect, and defend the country that provides them with a home, physical security, civil liberties, and protection of their IP, as well as billions of dollars in research and development funding and billions more for the education of their students. America needs its academic community as a full partner in the protection of our country and its investments in academic research. We need a sea change in the way researchers understand their obligations to the country. They need to bring an attitude toward making this work for America, not just a check-the-block exercise to be met with minimal compliance. We need the academic community to work with the federal government to further develop and strengthen research security protocols, and we need to more fulsomely implement what is already in place. Similarly, we need to better protect private research. For this, we need U.S. industry to step up as well, especially given the growing magnitude of the private sector's investment in R&D and its work on the bleeding edge of dual-use technologies. In addition, we should consider whether new regimes are needed altogether. Perhaps most importantly, with respect to research funding, the U.S. government should start with the rebuttable presumption that science and technology cooperation with China is not in the national interest of the United States. We should be asking first whether any proposed research with China is absolutely indispensable to U.S. national security, and third, whether the proposed research advances U.S. national security, economic, or public health interests more than it does China's. And every decision we make needs to be informed by the answer to whether our men and women in uniform will face these U.S.-funded technologies on the battlefield. In the immortal words of Thomas Jefferson, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you for your testimony. Mr. Jeffrey Stoff is the founder and president at the Center for Research Security, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to the protection of research and innovation from harmful foreign influence and interference. Mr. Stoff previously spent over 18 years in the U.S. government as a China analyst and is recognized as an expert in technology protection issues. Please give your opening statement.
Subcommittee Chairman McCormick, Ranking Member Sykes, distinguished committee members, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on this critically important topic. Over the last 15 years, I have focused on China's research ecosystem and its state-driven technology transfer apparatus. While in government, I worked closely with most federal agencies that fund scientific research, as well as law enforcement and intelligence components. That support exposed me to deficiencies and vulnerabilities in both academia and government, which I describe in detail in my written testimony. For several years, starting in 2019, a few colleagues and I exerted considerable effort compiling analyses, briefing government leadership, and proposing programmatic changes to address knowledge gaps and structural impediments to safeguarding innovation security. Unfortunately, most of those efforts fell on deaf ears. My frustrations with continued inaction by agencies charged with protecting federal research investments and our national and economic security drove me to leave federal service in 2021 after 18 years. It is past time we have candid and perhaps uncomfortable conversations on how China's largely unfettered access to our research ecosystem undermines our national and economic security, and that China exploits and corrupts our research, often through the willing participation of U.S. institutions. And because universities are primarily run like businesses, in that bringing in revenue is their primary objective, the financial incentives of universities often run counter to U.S. national and economic security interests. Academia continues to demonstrate a systemic disregard for national security considerations and an indifference to or a lack of awareness of ethical risks when collaborating with China. These issues persist in part because of a lack of regulatory oversight regarding fundamental research, which worked fine through the Cold War, but now fails to address geostrategic realities. Even where there are rules in place, in terms of federal grant contract conditions, the evidence suggests continued and widespread noncompliance by academia. Currently, only NASA and the Department of Defense have certain research funding restrictions concerning collaborations with China. No other activities or sources of funding are prescribed. Researchers and institutions are free to partner, collaborate, establish cooperative programs, etc., with any PRC entity of their choosing. Academia has claimed that they now understand the risks much better and have a good handle on security concerns. Empirical studies I've produced and data I compiled in my written testimony prove otherwise, such as low estimates of over 27,000 articles published in just the past 5 years involving collaborations between U.S. institutions and PLA entities, PRC defense weapons design and production facilities, state-owned defense enterprises, and key defense research universities. Additionally, neither academia nor the U.S. government has taken any observable policy measures to mitigate PRC practices that undermine research integrity issues. In addition to academia's disclosure failures to the Department of Education on foreign sources of funding as required by law, non-disclosures on federal grants of current and pending support, often coming from China, persist. Many of those grants could have gone to other universities that didn't have this PRC support. For the universities acting in good faith, losing out on these grants can result in smaller budgets and fewer resources to hire PhD students, attract top talent, etc., which in turn makes them less competitive on future grant proposals. This also translates to fewer opportunities for our children in the U.S. and an erosion of STEM talent pipelines. Compounding these issues are structural problems in the government to identify and mitigate threats from China and monitor and enforce academia's noncompliance. These include each agency has its own research security and due diligence process. A lack of interagency data sharing results in duplicative risk assessments when done at all, and inconsistent standards for assessing risks across federal agencies. The U.S. government also has few resources or processes in place to monitor for national security risks post-award of a grant or contract. And further handicapping these efforts is a dearth of subject matter expertise within both the intelligence and law enforcement communities. A key recommendation in my testimony is to consolidate government research security functions into a centralized organization that closes persistent knowledge, regulatory, and policy gaps, creates efficiencies and cost savings, builds subject matter expertise through training analysts and investigators, bolsters compliance monitoring and enforcement, serves as a resource to assist universities in conducting risk assessments, disrupts China's unfettered access to federally funded research, and imposes real costs to China when it violates values of integrity and reciprocity. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. And now, Dr. Maria Zuber is a professor of geophysics and presidential advisor for science and technology policy at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And from here on, we can actually use MIT as an acronym since I've just explained it. Most people have never heard of it. She is a leading university voice on research security and co-chaired the National Academy's National Science, Technology, and Security Roundtable. We welcome your remarks.
Great. Chairman McCormick, Ranking Member Sykes, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. Striking the right balance on how the U.S. research enterprise should interact with China is critical to U.S. national security and competitiveness. Getting that balance right is not easy or obvious. We know that China is an economic, geopolitical, and military rival, and that China has sought to advance through illicit means. Even now, when China has considerable strengths of its own, it tries to take undue advantage of U.S. research efforts. Yet cutting all ties to China would likely hobble the U.S. competitiveness as much as it would harm China. Finding the right balance starts with clearly assessing current practices at U.S. universities. While many universities were slow to appreciate the threat posed by China, that has changed. From what I have seen as co-chair of the congressionally mandated National Academies Roundtable on Science, Technology, and Security, universities are now largely aware of the legitimate concerns about China, and they have put in place new procedures, still a work in progress, and many coordinate regularly with law enforcement. MIT has been a leader in responding to the changing nature of China. MIT was the first university to cut ties with Huawei more than 6 years ago. We created a special review process for research collaborations with China in 2019 and issued a public report laying out our approach to China in 2022. At MIT, any proposed collaboration with China is reviewed for its potential impact on national security, economic security, and human rights. We do not believe, though, that research collaborations should be cut off entirely. Properly structured engagement can be beneficial to U.S. researchers. Collaboration is also a way to stay abreast of developments in China, which is now a leader in key fields. There are also still some areas, like climate science, food safety, and certain areas of health, where there is much to gain from joint work and little risk. This is all publishable basic research. Research funding from China should, of course, be disclosed. Congress has usefully clarified and tightened disclosure requirements in recent years, and National Security Presidential Memorandum 33, with input from both the Trump and the Biden administrations, and from me, by the way, provides an effective framework for disclosing foreign collaborations. Perhaps above all else, it has been a critical competitive advantage to the U.S. that we are able to attract the top scientific talent from around the world, including from China. The vast majority of Chinese PhD students, more than 80%, remain in the U.S. after getting their degrees, and more likely would if our policies were more supportive. Students pose a relatively low security risk since they work in an environment where research is published. Visa applicants should be more rigorously vetted, but I am not aware of evidence that students are extensively involved in illicit activities. If such information exists, I'd love to see it. In my written testimony, I go into some detail on existing policies to protect U.S. technology, where they could be shored up, and where they should be left alone. But I'd like to close here with a broader point. Protective policies are needed, but they're not enough. We have to strengthen our own research enterprise. One need look no farther than the recent announcement by the Chinese AI firm DeepSeek to know that restrictions may buy us some time, but they will not prevent Chinese technological advancement. We must win this race by running faster, not just by trying to trip up the competition. We must continue to ensure that the U.S. is a magnet for the world's top talent by investing in U.S. science and technology and by offering reliable funding for competitively awarded research projects. That means taking steps like funding the National Science Foundation as envisioned in the CHIPS and Science Act that this committee helped draft on a bipartisan basis. Instead, we seem to be fighting about how much to slash its budget and personnel, including personnel hired to bolster research security. We shouldn't be naive about China, but that includes not denying its strengths. We're not going to compete successfully just by building a moat around the U.S. We'd better be sure that everything we need from others, especially talent, can get across that moat, and we'd better be sure that nothing inside our moat is deteriorating. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you to my witnesses for your opening remarks, and now I will recognize Representative Harrigan from North Carolina. Welcome to our committee, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for your testimony today. I wanted to talk about Chinese espionage in science and academia from the CSIS report and give you a couple examples here that will frame my question. In January of 2020, a Harvard University professor and two Chinese nationals, Yangqing Yi and Zhaozhang Zheng, were indicted for attempted theft of biological research. Dr. Lieber was a participant in the 1,000 Talents Plan while actively accepting National Institutes of Health and Department of Defense funding. Yi, a lieutenant of the PLA, compiled information on U.S. military projects for the CCP. Zheng committed the theft of 21 biological research vials to promote Chinese projects. In July of 2020, Sa Tiangyang, a University of Arkansas professor, was indicted for wire fraud for his acceptance of U.S. contracting funds related to NASA and the Air Force while being simultaneously employed by Chinese entities. In August of 2020, Zheng Dongqing, a professor at Texas A&M, was charged with wire fraud for concealing his affiliation with Chinese universities and enterprises while accepting a NASA grant. His position allowed him access to sensitive NASA projects. He was also a participant of the Thousand Talents Plan. I have only 5 minutes, so I cannot read the other countless examples of CCP infiltration into our national research apparatus. But my team compiled 58 different instances of various forms of research espionage that has occurred just in the last 6 years. So after reading this report and after listening to your testimony today, it is incredibly troubling, and I simply want to know one thing. Why do we still have any Chinese nationals inside of our research institutions, especially within institutions that participate in research that is critical to our national interests and our national security? Mr. Sargent?
I have no idea. I have no idea. I don't think it makes any sense at all. I think we need to be far more secure in who we allow into this country and who we allow to conduct research, especially on U.S. taxpayer-funded dollars. And I think it's very dangerous for us not to carefully vet all of the people that are coming to the United States to study to make sure that they, in fact, are not linked to PLA institutions or universities. And one thing we know for sure is that not only is China after our technology, they are constantly adapting and adopting new strategies to acquire it. So we can't think we have now, after 4 years of efforts, reached the pinnacle of security and put everything in place we need to do, because the Chinese are going to adapt to it, and they're going to find ways around it. So we need to, as I say, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And we've got to continue to remain vigilant. And again, going back to the answer to your question, I don't think they should be.
Thank you. Mr. Stoff?
Obviously, I think this is a very complex issue. I think that definitely, and I agree with Mr. Sargent, that at least within critical technology fields, within STEM fields, a far more rigorous process, and I talk about this in my testimony, that needs to be done that requires the kind of vetting and due diligence and assessments that have. There may be other areas, like from my perspective, any of the humanities and social sciences and other things, that's not a concern to me. The Chinese should come here and learn how our democratic governance systems work, our legal structures, things like that. So I think a complete and total ban isn't necessarily meet the objectives that you're seeking. But I also want to point out something that I think is not really well understood, and that is the examples that you're describing relate primarily to these constructs of economic espionage, and intellectual property theft. And most of the problems and the threats that's occurring on campus are none of those things. They're not illicit. And the scale and scope of the other ways in which they're acquiring technology and know-how is often not espionage, and that is completely underrepresented, not understood in the scale and the scope, and we need to be more vigilant about that.
I have very limited time, so Dr. Zuber, I don't know that we're going to get to you, but I think we've got to keep in mind here, we've got access and we have placement with all of these individuals, and the CCP will exert leverage. That is a problem for our country. We need to deal with this, and we need to deal with it swiftly in our research institutions. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. With that, I recognize Ranking Member Sykes for her questions.
Thank you. Dr. Zuber, I am extremely concerned that the weakening of our scientific enterprise will lead to self-inflicted research security catastrophes. On Friday, CNN reported that the Naval Criminal Investigative Service has determined that China and Russia are attempting to recruit federal employees who have been laid off. Scientists are specifically being targeted by Chinese institutions, as seen in advertisements to recruit researchers, and the advertisement into the record.
No objections?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as the Trump administration casts off scientists and destabilized research in the name of efficiency, our adversaries celebrate and look to fill that vacuum. Dr. Zuber, can you please describe the relationship between funding our research enterprise and bolstering research security?
Okay, thank you for that question. Absolutely, I mean, the fundamental basis of my testimony was that we absolutely need compliance. We absolutely need to keep critical and sensitive research secure. Agree with that. But we're not going to get there if we don't invest. Okay, so last week also in the first round of funding cuts, the NSF Secure Center, which was noted in the member statements, had 5 out of their 9 employees laid off in the probationary. They may get 1 back, okay? So in a very area that we all consider high priority, they're laying off people. So, I mean, count me at the front of the line that the federal bureaucracy could be more efficient and ought to be more efficient. But it ought to be done thoughtfully and strategically, and we ought to be thinking about what functions the federal government really ought to be executing and what functions should be done by others. And then we ought to identify the jobs and the employee talent that is needed to fill those roles.
Thank you, Dr. Zuber, and thank you for highlighting that in your testimony. And I do want to ask you all a question, and if you can answer it in maybe 15 words or less. Yesterday, during the joint address to Congress, President Trump said, quote, "You should get rid of the CHIPS Act." Your response to that in 15 words or less.
I would be happy to start. So I covered CHIPS Act for the Congressional Research Service. I know
You're getting a little bit beyond your 15 words. We don't have the time.
I think we need to be very judicious in what we choose to accept and reject in the CHIPS Act.
Thank you. Mr. Stoff.
I think it needs to be continued, and it's really important for our innovation and security.
Thank you, Dr. Zuber.
It needs to be continued, and there's $13 billion of it of R&D investment, and we have to train a new generation of chip makers in this country.
Thank you very much. We have heard rumors that DOGE has arrived at the National Science Foundation. This is extremely worrying under the guise of making government more efficient. I think we all have the idea to make government efficient and to curb waste, but as we've identified, some of this has been more of a wrecking ball rather than a scalpel. When it comes to research security, that means that any information shared between federal science agencies and universities could be ripe for by hacking by our adversaries, including China and Russia. Would you have concerns if the information at MIT, Dr. Zuber, has transmitted to NSF or transferred to non-secure data servers? And what is the risk of research security-related information being accessed by unvetted DOGE representatives and potentially foreign adversaries?
Okay, well, what I will tell you is that at MIT, we don't do any classified research on campus. When technology gets to the point where it gets complex and concerning for either economic or national security, we send it to classified area. So nothing on campus is classified. However, it is intellectual property, and if it were to get out, it would compromise the IP of the creators, and it could potentially give somebody maybe a 6-month to a year head start on something, but ultimately everything we do on campus is unclassified, so it's going to get out there eventually.
And Mr. Sargent, if you can do it in 10 seconds, not my rule, but the committee's, do you have any concern about keeping this data private?
Of course I do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back. Thank you for cooperating with me.
And obviously, 5 minutes is not much time. We'll do a second round of questioning if anybody's interested to stay on. It'll be rapid, but I just wanted to make sure that she's being great, respectful. Thank you, Ranking Member, for staying in your time limit. But we'll have a second round for people who want to ask additional questions. With that, I recognize Chairman Babin for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Mr. Stoff, why is it important for agencies to share information regarding research security threats to each other Is there a better system that the federal government could adopt to analyze research security threats?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. Yes to all. It is essential both from a compliance, monitoring, enforcement, investigative function to have interagency share in ways that they're not really doing very much now because of different sharing rules, authorities, what have you. And this is a particular problem with academic research because a lot of the issues in the compliance or threats that are coming are often involving more than one federal funding agency. You know, there are a lot of scientists that get money from NSF, but also Department of Defense or NIH or others. Right. And so it is really, really important that there has to be a much more centralized sort of structure where these can work in a more efficient way where data is shared. Similarly, I think the U.S. government needs to do a much better job at sharing not necessarily specific details, but the trends and patterns of behavior when they investigate a lot of these activities. And they, in my opinion, has not done a very good job, particularly law enforcement, explaining to academia, hey, there are all these things that are happening or behaviors, not all of which is illicit, but compromises the integrity, the value system, the honesty that you depend on to conduct research and in a trusted fashion. And we see that, and I've seen that when I worked in government. I supported a lot of these investigations. Many of them never become an actual public record or an indictment or what have you. And so there's all this information that's not being adequately shared. So you need to have both. And having a centralized structure, in my written testimony, I talk about basically building a national center. A crude analogy would be an NCTC.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Sargent, under the first Trump administration, OSTP established an interagency working group on research security under the Joint Committee on Research Environments. Under the Biden administration, this effort was discontinued. Could you describe the purpose and the role of the JCOR Subcommittee on Research Security to coordinate activities for identifying and addressing threats to our academic research enterprise?
Honestly, that's not an area of my expertise. However, I will just say that having had extensive experience with the National Science and Technology Council, of which JCOR is a part of, that the purpose of these interagency activities is the sharing of information, the coordination of best practices. So I imagine that's what they were doing in the context of our research security.
Right, okay, thank you. And then finally, Dr. Zuber, what resources are available to universities for assessment, identification, and analysis of research security threats? And how are these tools informing and promoting information sharing of risks among universities?
Okay, there's senior research officers of the research universities coordinate information. The presidents coordinate information. The NSF Secure Center, DARPA has put out guidance, and the NIH had put out guidance, and the DOE had put out guidance. But in many cases, it's vague. And National Security Presidential Memorandum 33 was meant to standardize a lot of the reporting across, and the implementation, which is underway but still not finally there. So if it were done properly, that would theoretically take care of all of the compliance that is, the lack of compliance that's accidental, okay, where people thought they reported something, but they reported it there, not here. Okay, it would not take care of somebody who truly wants to do something wrong, okay, and those are actually difficult to root out. But the, you know, we're still, despite 2 presidential administrations that have gone over NSPM 33, the guidance is still sufficiently vague that, you know, universities are supposed to put a research integrity plan in place, but they don't tell us what the plan should constitute and how a university can certify that it's actually meeting those criteria.
Thank you. I see the others nodding their heads. Would you like to add into that as well?
No, I strongly agree with Dr. Zuber that a lack of clarity, a lack of guidance, a lack of granular sort of level. What is it that we need to do? What are the tools, infrastructures that need to be in place? The Secure Center may be able to start addressing those issues, but this has been going on, as Dr. Zuber said, for multiple administrations, and there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and I don't think we have the time to kind of do this as slow rolling as we have.
And I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, so I yield back, unless you'll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will have a second round for anybody who wants to participate. I just want to keep this on track, if you don't mind, sir. With that, we recognize Ranking Member Lofgren for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I see a lot of agreement among our witnesses. We do need clear standards, we need clarity, we need adherence, we need to protect our country. I think there's bipartisan agreement on those things, but as Ranking Member Sykes mentioned in her statement, there is an unconfirmed report that DOGE has arrived at NSF. Now, reportedly, one of the Musk hackers setting up shop at headquarters is Edward Korestein. Korestein is better known in his various online communities by the moniker Big Balls. Now, this 19-year-old is allegedly gaining access to NSF data systems. I'll try and be brief when I go through the laundry list of reasons why I believe this teenager is unfit to serve in government. I am advised that Mr. Big Balls started a company called Tesla.sexy LLC, a site that allowed users to share images confidentially. The URLs created redirected to images hosted on his website and apparently included references to the sale of child sexual abuse material, among other really horrible topics. It's reported that in 2022, he was fired from an internship after leaking confidential business information to competitors. He bragged about this online, boasting that he had access to every single machine. It's reported that he also participated in chat rooms with U.S. law enforcement that have monitored his cyber crimes, investigating cyber crimes. And now, apparently, he has access to government data systems, most recently, allegedly, NSF. NSF hosts personally identifiable information of employees, principal investigators, confidential business information, trade secrets when relevant to project proposals, and controlled unclassified information related to law enforcement sensitive information. Dr. Zuber, you have plenty of 19-year-olds working at MIT labs. If an MIT student admitted to stealing data from a lab in order to share it with people not authorized to access it, do you have disciplinary procedures that would prevent that student from ever accessing sensitive information again?
Well, if, so all this is alleged.
Correct.
I can't vouch for it, but we do have disciplinary procedures. It's actually potentially a research integrity violation, and we have, there are very clear rules for how to deal with research integrity, and when there is a finding, there are consequences.
Let me just say as a hypothetical, because these have been reported, obviously we haven't done an independent investigation, but if someone with the alleged background that I've just outlined had access to sensitive information at U.S. research agencies, would that be a cause for concern?
Well, even if there were no research involved, if there was access to personally identifiable information of, any member of our community or any community, that would clearly be a great concern.
Mr. Sargent, you're an expert on our science and technology enterprise, and you feel strongly that certain information must be stringently protected, and I agree with you. What do you think about allowing an individual access to our science agencies' controlled unclassified information if that individual had a history of sharing confidential business information with competitors, or if that person had been known to host images with titles alluding to child sexual abuse, or if that person participated in forums monitored by law enforcement during cybercrimes investigations. If that were the background, would that cause concern?
Absolutely.
Well, I would just like to say, Mr. Chairman, that while we are of one mind that we must protect ourselves from threats from those abroad, we ought to be alert to the threat that is being posed by this army of teenage and 20-something hackers that have invaded our government, that are accessing our private information and including our science information, including individuals such as Mr. Big Balls, who is now apparently rooting through the NSF database. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Just to clarify, as chair, just to make sure we're all on the same page, my committee staff has just been officially told that no one from DOJ has entered the NSF. That's official. 84 of 86 probationary employees at NSF have been reinstated. No grants at the National Science Foundation have been canceled. There is no funding freeze. All those things are now official. Since January 20th, nearly 500 awards have gone out and more than 200 panels have taken place. I just want to make sure that we're clarifying the details since we're getting real-time information. Just don't want to confuse or confound any real information. And I'm not trying to make this partisan. I just want to make sure it's factual. Thank you. With that, I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. Sargent, this is somewhat of a rhetorical question, but are American graduate students any less intelligent or qualified than Chinese graduate students?
I always forget that. Mr. Chairman, I love rhetorical questions.
It's a yes or no question, sir.
American students are as capable as Chinese students, or more so.
Of course. And I wouldn't want to be the person who said they weren't. But then why do you think that certain universities insist on hiring Chinese graduate students when there are plenty of American students available? And literally up to 50% of all graduate students hired are from foreign areas that go back to foreign areas. Why do we keep doing that?
Well, a good question. Part of it is momentum. A good deal of universities' prestige is the ability to attract the best international students, and it allows for these connections and relationships to be made back to the home countries of these students. And so by continuing to recruit them and allowing them to, be a part of our university education system, they develop these relationships. And these relationships go on long beyond the time that those students are there, because those students then matriculate out and they go into other positions in academia, they go into industry, and those ties allow that university to benefit from that relationship.
So there's probably a financial incentive of some sort, because otherwise it doesn't really make sense. Right? A lot of that talent goes back to their foreign national lands. And then a lot of talent goes out into the community, but they're not really citizens unless they go down that path.
It's almost always follow the money.
Very good. Putting research security aside, what is the long-term impact of U.S. students in Americans? What is the long-term impact?
Well, it's been self-fulfilling. If you continue to bring foreign students in because they're the best, those spots are not available for excellent U.S. students to go and become PhDs and themselves become principal investigators. And so then you find yourself in the position of not having Americans to fill these positions. And so it's a self-fulfilling behavior.
And I just want to highlight this. In a university system that's ranked not even in the top 30 in the world, the United States, which puts more money into education than any other country by far, and yet we're spending half of the research dollar, half of the money that we spend to develop instructors goes to foreign nationals here in the United States. We are basically cutting off the head of our future teachers, researchers, innovators, and we're going to fall further behind. If we're not even in the top 30, and we're falling further behind, why would we train other countries to subvert our education system? I don't understand. Dr. Zuber, one of the things I noticed is that we have a lot of money from endowments. Even MIT does. I don't know why, but they happen to have a lot of pride in their university. Do you think that that's what they intend when we give U.S. dollars? Taxpayers say, hey, you know what? I'm going to give you a lot of money to develop. I think U.S. students is what most people think. When U.S. citizens give money to an endowment, they want to see a university develop U.S. talent. And we give money to see U.S. talent develop. Why are we bringing in so many people from other countries when literally up to 50% of the people? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. So MIT is 97% STEM students, okay? And we accept all the top U.S. students that apply. And let me tell you, when we have a FIRST robotics competition for middle school students in the United States, we fill up high school gyms. When the Chinese hold FIRST robotic competitions, they fill up stadiums, okay? So it's a question of students going into STEM, okay? Then, interesting question, or interesting statistic, U.S. students who graduate, okay, with STEM fields, only a third of them go into STEM careers. So they're
I would make the case that part of that is because of the way we influence our students to begin with. If you look at even the way that TikTok was used here in America, a Chinese-controlled TikTok, by the way, they want to develop influencers in America instead of scientists, whereas it's used in China on a limited basis to develop people to get into science. This is a systemic problem in the education system. And we are in a competition with these folks that we're literally educating and bringing in talent, but we're then divesting from that in the way that we're giving up that talent. And I think it's a very dangerous precedent. I'm going to go ahead and yield because I'm out of time, and I want to stay on and not be a hypocrite. With that, Ms. Bonamici out of Oregon. Bonamici, sorry, out of Oregon, my hometown, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know you have some Oregon connections. And thank you to the ranking member. Thank you to the witnesses for your expertise in being here today. I want to join the ranking member Sykes in sending deepest condolences to the family of Representative Turner. He will be missed. So this hearing, Mr. Chairman, you talked about, I didn't have a chance to fact check your numbers and facts about the NSF, but I do know that they have laid off many people. Even though they may be trying to bring some of them back, they're still facing significant budget cuts, as are most agencies, and the disruption and chaos has been really concerning. This hearing is titled Assessing the Threat to U.S.-Funded Research, and it is indeed an important topic. But threats to American research and research security do not only come from foreign actors, they also come from the reckless actions of this administration that are destabilizing our scientific enterprise and purging federal scientists at NOAA, at NSF, at NIST, at DOE. And Ranking Member Sykes mentioned that intelligence is already showing that China and Russia are eager to exploit that by trying to recruit some of our scientists, particularly scientists with national security experience. And I want to note as well, and to follow up to Ranking Member Lofgren's comments that about DOGE, the Trump administration sent via an unsecure email server the names of CIA employees, which is incredibly dangerous. You might have seen that they seem to be pretty good at hacking in, but not in protecting databases. And I'm sure everyone saw the takeover of the screens at HUD. They couldn't even figure out how to get the images off the screen. They had to go unplug the television. So, I mean, my point is, what are these people doing that is creating a lot of instability and security and uncertainty about the safety of our data and research? So instead of strengthening our defenses, the administration seems to be gutting key research agencies, as I mentioned, and purging experienced scientists, sending a chilling message to researchers that their work might be under constant suspicion. The so-called China initiative that was implemented during the first Trump administration was an example of mismanagement and certainly some racial profiling. It disproportionately targeted scientists of Chinese descent, drove talent away, and ultimately did more harm than good. The Brennan Center for Justice rightly called it a failure, warning against reviving such misguided efforts. And meanwhile, as our institutions are struggling with frozen grants and reduced indirect cost support and uncertainty about whether international collaboration will be discouraged or even criminalized. Other nations, especially China, as I mentioned, have seized on the opportunity. So the U.S. cannot afford to keep making these mistakes. Our science enterprise thrives on openness, collaboration, and stability, not on paranoia and politically driven purges. So we need a serious evidence-based discussion. We all take this seriously. I want to ask you, Dr. Zuber, because I know you've been at MIT for a while, and we think back to the China initiative from the first Trump administration. Assuming that there's going to be something similar, what would you change and what would you keep the same?
Well, I think actually Mr. Stoff touched on it, I think both in his remarks and in more detail in his testimony. But the China initiative initially focused on espionage, and they started with industry, and then they moved to universities, and there was very, very little espionage in universities. The kinds of indiscretions within universities are transmission of information that will be published anyway, but it doesn't rise to the level of espionage. And so these should be adjudicated by agencies.
And you talked about the balance that's
If
needed.
you're caught, you lose funding for 5 years, and that will take care of that problem. And in fact, there was a report by the Jasons that put out, that said this sort of thing should be treated as a research integrity violation.
Thank you. And in my remaining half a minute, Mr. Stoff, you advocated basically for cutting ties with Chinese researchers, but would shutting out top-tier talent like in AI or quantum computing limit our potential?
Well, I don't necessarily agree that we completely cut everything off, but we're not even cutting off, we're not even restricting the most high-risk collaborations or people. We're still letting them in. We're still collaborating with defense and weapons programs and state-owned enterprises in China. So can we start with that? And I would say we need to start restricting that, and then we can be more nuanced.
Appreciate that. My time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And with that, we recognize Representative Bidge from Alaska.
Thank you, Chairman. First question for Mr. Stoff. China has labeled itself a near-Arctic state and has invested in Arctic research collaborations with U.S. institutions. Have Chinese-linked researchers or institutions attempted to establish partnerships with Alaska-based Arctic research programs?
Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I have no knowledge or expertise in the area with regards to Alaska, but I can quickly say that China has aggressively done this with other polar nations like Norway, for example, where their largest state-owned defense conglomerate that builds radar systems and communication systems for the PLA established ground stations for Norway under the guise of scientific purposes. And this is happening, I believe, elsewhere. I don't know if it's happening in Alaska, but they have a practice of doing this, and it's a big problem because they're actually developing more advanced radar systems as a result.
Thank you. And given that Arctic focus, are you aware of any efforts that the Chinese have made with respect to Greenland as well?
No, not personally. I haven't looked into it, but I would be surprised if they were not pursuing those regions because of the strategic import that they represent.
Let me ask you this. Given that Alaska hosts key U.S. Coast Guard operations and Arctic maritime research, are you aware of any instances in which foreign adversaries have attempted to infiltrate federally funded programs tied to maritime security?
Yes, that's actually fairly extensive, but we don't have a good handle on it. We do know that a number of civilian PRC defense institutions that are heavily involved in PLA, Navy, submarine, underwater warfare, underwater weaponry systems, communications, et cetera, collaborate extensively, almost without any sort of restriction with most U.S. universities, some of which even involve Department of Defense funding. Because it's in a fundamental research area, as I mentioned earlier, there's really no regulatory oversight over it.
Do you believe that the Coast Guard should be given additional resources to protect research collaborations involving Arctic defense infrastructure?
Possibly, but I do think a better approach is what I mentioned in my testimony, is if you have a centralized government entity that kind of does this for all federal agencies, it would be far more efficient and effective.
Thank you. And additional question for Mr. Sargent. Do you believe that that Congress should require enhanced security screening for federally funded researchers in critical areas such as Arctic security, Arctic energy, or climate studies?
For U.S. researchers?
Yes. Or any additional researchers that may be coming from a place outside the United States but are working with U.S. researchers?
Yes, absolutely. I think any area that has potential national security implications, we need to make sure that the people who are working on them don't have any ties that make them question their loyalty to the United States.
So you don't believe the current screening practices are sufficient in order to address the security concerns that we have?
I can't speak to the adequacy of the current security screenings.
Okay, thank you. Do you know whether, again, to Mr. Sargent, do you know whether federal agencies have conducted comprehensive research security audits of institutions in the Arctic, which engage in Arctic science, climate research, or strategic defense studies? Do you know if that's happening?
I don't know anything of that nature, no.
Okay. Thank you. With that, I yield back.
And now Representative Rivas from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman McCormick and Ranking Member Sykes. First, I join my colleagues in expressing condolences to the family of my fellow freshman colleague, Sylvester Turner. He will be missed by all of us. I'd like to start by taking a moment of personal privilege and thank Dr. Zuber for appearing before the subcommittee today. As an MIT alum myself, it gives me great pride to see an MIT professor discussing the importance and the challenges facing the scientific community and the research ecosystem. Over the last 7 weeks, we have seen a complete disruption and attack to one of America's pillars for the future, our scientific and academic community. Our research ecosystem depends on a steady stream of educated experts. As co-chair of the bipartisan STEM Education Caucus, I take great pride in America's leadership to produce the next generation of researchers and scientists of the future. The future will only come from early and continued STEM investments in every zip code in America. I have spent most of my career engaging and preparing students, American students, to get into STEM fields. It's our responsibility to provide the current and future workforce with the tools to innovate and create technological solutions and emerging and essential technologies and industries like AI, healthcare, and the environment. However, a major threat to U.S.-funded research is this administration's reckless actions that include layoffs of about 800 employees at NOAA, up to 2,000 employees at the Department of Energy, and more than 150 employees at the National Science Foundation. Despite those dizzying acts against our nation's science core, one of the most worrying cuts has been the NIH policy capping indirect cost at 15%. I worry about the capacity of smaller institutions to keep up, and that concern has only grown in recent weeks as I hear from constituents and organizations serving my district. Indirect costs are expenditures that aren't tied directly to research staffing or supplies, but they nonetheless support infrastructure and will cede American dominance in biomedical research to our foreign competitors like China, Russia, and Iran for years to come. Dr. Zuber, I've joined my colleagues in 2 letters to the acting NIH director expressing my deep concerns on these NIH cuts and how they will impact my state and district. Can you elaborate on how these cuts will impact research universities' ability to compete and how you anticipate smaller institutions will be impacted?
Okay, thank you very much. A lot of thoughts there, and thank you for raising the indirect cost, because people don't understand indirect costs, okay? It's whether a cost is a direct cost or an indirect cost, that's determined by uniform guidance. Both are the costs of doing research. You could put it in one column or you could put it in the other column, but that's what it costs, okay? If we don't get the indirect cost reimbursement, the larger schools that have endowments have to use their endowments to cover that. And at MIT, we already, I won't say subsidize, I will say co-invest in research 100%, okay? So our research volume, we put in an equal amount from our endowment to kind of double the impact from the federal and other funding that we receive. Schools with either smaller schools or R1 research institutions with small endowments, especially those with medical centers, don't have any funds to draw on, okay? So we would do less research, okay? So less impact in the world, and MIT grads have started, as you know, tens of thousands of companies, okay? But for schools without endowments and have medical schools, they're going to be out of business, okay? And these are economic drivers in their areas and important educational institutions producing the workforce for tomorrow. So the impacts are potentially huge.
Thank you. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. And next we will recognize Representative McLean Delaney from Maryland for 5 minutes.
So I thank the panelists and our ranking members for convening this important hearing. You hear me? Hi. So, hello. I thank the panelists and our ranking members for convening this important hearing, striking the right balance between cyber and research vis-a-vis China and Russia with respect to our research universities. And I really appreciated Dr. Zuber's comments, how there are legitimate concerns with respect to China and research, but how we cannot, throw the, baby out with the bathwater, and we really need to not cut off entirely and really preserve some of this for U.S. competitiveness. I represent the 6th District of Maryland, and in my district is NIST, parts of NIH, the National Institute of Cancer, Fort Detrick, which deals with some of our pathogens, our fire academy, and our nearby, next door is NOAA, of course. So research and innovation through these incredible agencies, and the hiring freezes by Rep. Bonamici is really important that we continue to understand how these freezes and cuts will really undercut both our cybersecurity and other institutions. But building on some of the 2 questions I have, because I have only limited time, in terms of under-resourced universities and building on Rep. Rivas's questions concerning indirect costs, I asked the panel, but Dr. Zuber first, do indirect costs contribute to universities' compliance with laws, including those related to research security? And do you believe that universities should be able to classify research security support as a direct cost, so to ensure the protection of sensitive research and data?
Okay, so I don't know all the details, but I could tell you that indirect costs, part of it is facilities, the larger part of it is facilities and taking care of the buildings that you wouldn't have unless you were doing research in them, okay? And then the other part is administrative costs. And those administrative costs, the compliance has been going through the roof for years and years and years. And more rules come in and no rules ever seem to go away. And so you need staff to be able to handle that. The recent focus on research security has caused a big increase. We've had to hire a lot more people to do compliance, and most universities in the indirect cost system are already maxed out in the administrative part. So obviously, if you could, it doesn't matter to me if they're direct costed or indirect costed, but all this has got to be paid for.
Well, our research institutions are our nation's jewels and why we are where we are in America. And so just making sure that we are able to protect that information and those collaborations. I want to move on to cybersecurity. I worked at the Biden administration as Deputy Secretary at NTIA and actually worked on a lot of cyber national security issues vis-a-vis some of even Huawei and 5G and AI. But just this week, following orders from our Defense Secretary, DoD's U.S. Cyber Command suspended operations and planning for offensive cyber operations against Russia. And we're weakening our cybersecurity posture with Russia will hurt our national security and make us more vulnerable. Research conversations have largely revolved around a threat posed by China, but we cannot forget Russia as a serious threat. I guess I ask all of you, well, Dr. Sargent, what potential is there for harm if the Trump administration continues to weaken our offensive cyber operations against foreign adversaries? And to the panel, can the federal government play a role in bolstering the cybersecurity defenses of our universities against threats from foreign adversaries?
Thank you for the question. First of all, let me correct you on one thing. I have not earned my PhD. I am just a mainstream engineer, systems engineer from the University of Virginia. But, and by the way, let me say, with NIST in your district, I am a massive fan of NIST. I think they're an outstanding institution with great civil servant employees who do a fantastic job in a wide range of areas. With respect to cybersecurity, I don't think you can begin to overstate its importance. And the risk that we face from both China and Russia to every system in the United States, including our water systems, our power systems, our transportation systems, all of them are at risk. And China is, I'm told, I don't have any inside information, but I am told and I have read that they are dropping all kinds of malware in our systems so that if we find ourselves in conflict with them, they can flip a switch and cause a lot of internal damage in the United States. So I don't think you can overestimate the importance of cybersecurity.
Thank you. Any other comments, if I have time?
The member's time has expired, but thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and give closing remarks. First of all, thank you all for being here today. It's an honor. I know it's at your own expense, and I know that sometimes it's thankless, but we want to thank you for being here today. I thank ranking members and also staffing. We understand that DOGE is going to make some mistakes along the way. I get it. They're being very aggressive, and they've admitted that they're going to make mistakes. I want to address the issue of age. Some people say age is a concern for DOGE. Those members who are, or those people who are actually doing the hard work and labor, realizing that Einstein, I believe, was, 26 years old when he published the theory of relativity, that you have Zuckerberg invented Facebook at the age of 19, that we have 17, 18, 19-year-olds in school right now coming up with brilliant theories on the next evolution of science, that my great-uncle was, I think, about 26 years old when he was a division commander as a B-17 pilot and was shot down in the greatest air war of all time and became one of the senior officers in Stalag 3. Age is not really the consideration when we talk about people who are going to create and sacrifice in this next generation. Matter of fact, we should be asking people to step in earlier. Matter of fact, coddling our kids certainly doesn't help them do what we need them to do for this next generation of competition. And I think the only numbers that we talk about, it's not about age, but it's about the numbers we need to save, because our government is far too invested in waste, fraud, and abuse. And we have a $36 trillion deficit right now. The interest payments alone on the debt that we have incurred exceed not only the military investment we do per year, but also the research we do. If we don't do something to trim the waste, we won't have the amount of money we need to invest in the future generations of America. Now, I think this hearing is really all about protecting our investments. The money we spend on education to develop the next generation of science and technologies. When you talk about the most transformational technologies that this generation's ever seen, in AI and quantum and other technologies that are going to literally change the face of the way that we employ, the way we explore, the way we create jobs, and how we fight the next war. We're on the front line. You are on the front line. And we need to make sure that our peers aren't getting advantages from our hard work and our investments. And I think that's what this entire committee hearing has been about. And I hope we continue this dialogue, because if we're not careful about what we do, it will result in some catastrophic results. God bless you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. And with that, we are adjourned.